The click of the main cabin door locking was usually a sound of release for the passengers of Ascend Air Flight 732. The final seal before their journey from New York to San Francisco began. But on that crisp Tuesday morning, for one woman seated in 12B, it was the sound of a trap being sprung. And for the man in the cockpit, Captain Marcus Thorne, a veteran pilot with a chest full of medals and a heart full of prejudice, it was the prelude to a power play. He believed he was removing a threat. He had no idea he was about to ground his own career, his airline, and his entire future, all because he couldn't see past the color of a passenger's skin. This isn't just a story of discrimination. It's the story of how a single, quiet act of injustice triggered a corporate avalanche, proving that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one holding the strings to your entire world. The chaotic symphony of JFK's Terminal 4 was a familiar melody to Isabella Sterling. The frantic clicks of rolling suitcases, the cacophony of final boarding calls, the low hum of 1,000 conversations. It was the white noise of a world in constant motion. To most, she would have been invisible, just another face in the river of humanity. She wore a simple, charcoal grey sweatsuit, comfortable for the long flight ahead, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a practical, elegant bun, and the only piece of jewelry on her was a simple, unadorned platinum band on her right hand. She carried no designer handbag, only a worn leather satchel that contained a tablet, a paperback novel, and a wallet. She was the ghost in the machine, and she liked it that way. Isabella Sterling was the founder and CEO of Sterling Vanguard, a private equity firm so powerful and discreet that its name was only ever whispered in the highest echelons of finance. She was a kingmaker, a corporate raider, and a builder of empires, all cloaked in the unassuming guise of a middle-aged black woman who could be your neighbor or your child's teacher. She had built her fortune from nothing, armed with a brilliant mind for market trends, and an almost supernatural ability to see value where others saw only risk. Her latest, and perhaps most audacious project, was Ascend Air. The airline was struggling, bleeding money from outdated fleets and crushing competition. Wall Street had written it off. But Isabella saw potential. She saw a robust network of routes, a loyal, if weary, employee base, and a brand that could be resurrected. For 6 months, Sterling Vanguard had been quietly buying up the airline's stock through shell corporations and then its debt until they became the largest single, albeit anonymous, investor. Today's flight was the final step. She was flying to San Francisco to meet with the board and its flailing CEO, Richard Davies. At that meeting, she would reveal her identity and present her final, non-negotiable offer to take the company private, saving it from bankruptcy and remolding it in her own image. She preferred to fly commercial, often in economy, on the airlines she was considering investing in. It was her own unique form of due diligence. You could learn more about a company from a 6-hour flight in a cramped seat than you could from 100 glossy presentations in a boardroom. You could feel the morale of the crew, the quality of the maintenance from the rattles in the overhead bins, and the attitude of the company from the way they treated their lowest-paying customers. As she boarded Flight 732, she gave a polite nod to the flight attendant at the door. The woman, whose name tag read Karen, offered a tight, cursory smile that didn't reach her eyes. Isabella found her seat, 12B, a middle seat in an exit row. She stowed her satchel under the seat in front of her, settled in, and began her quiet observation. The flight attendant, Karen Miller, moved through the cabin with a practiced, almost brittle efficiency. She was a 30-year veteran of the skies, and in her mind she had seen it all. She saw the entitled businessman who demanded constant attention, the screaming children whose parents let them run wild, and the nervous flyers who needed endless reassurance. She prided herself on being able to size up a passenger in a single glance. When she saw Isabella, she saw a problem. The woman was in an exit row, a position of responsibility. But her casual attire, her calm self-possession, it struck Karen as out of place, arrogant even. She made a mental note to keep an eye on 12B. Isabella, oblivious to the judgment being passed upon her, simply watched. She noted the worn upholstery, the flickering reading light in the row ahead, and the lukewarm welcome from the crew. It all confirmed her assessment. An airline with good bones, but suffering from a deep, systemic neglect. It was a perfect canvas. As the boarding process finished, a young man in a crisp suit squeezed past her into the window seat, 12A. He immediately opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The aisle seat, 12C, remained empty. Just before the door closed, a young, bright-eyed flight attendant named Chloe approached Isabella. "Ma'am," she said with a genuine smile, "since the seat next to you is open, you're welcome to move over and have a little more space if you'd like." "Thank you. That's very kind," Isabella replied, her voice warm and low. She slid over to the aisle seat, appreciating the small gesture of goodwill. It was a flicker of what Ascend Air could be. The main cabin door clicked shut. The safety video began to play. Isabella sent a final coded text to her second-in-command, Julian Vance, who was already in San Francisco preparing the final documents. "The Eagle is in the nest, landing at 14 Orphos. PST, prepare the final documents." She switched her phone to airplane mode and leaned back, ready for the uneventful flight that would precede the remaking of a billion-dollar company. Up in the cockpit, Captain Marcus Thorne was conducting his final checks. Thorne was a pilot of the old school. He believed in hierarchy, discipline, and the absolute authority of the captain. He loved the power of his command, the feeling of the 737 responding to his touch, the respect his uniform commanded. But beneath the polished veneer of professionalism lay a rigid and uncompromising worldview, one that had been hardened over years of seeing the world from 30,000 feet, detached and superior. He liked things neat, orderly, and predictable, and anything, or anyone, that deviated from his narrow expectations was a disruption to be managed. His world and Isabella's were on a collision course. The only question was how much damage the impact would cause. The first hour of the flight passed smoothly. The aircraft reached its cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a cross-country journey. Isabella read a few chapters of her book, her mind only half on the page as she catalogued mental notes for her presentation. The threadbare carpets, the indifferent service from Karen, the genuine kindness from Chloe. Every detail was a data point. About 90 minutes into the flight, her tablet buzzed with a pre-downloaded notification. It was a calendar alert. An encrypted video conference with her legal team in London was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. It was a final, pre-acquisition check-in. They had arranged to take advantage of the time difference. Isabella had her own satellite Wi-Fi hub, a discrete device approved for in-flight use, which she had declared and had cleared by the FAA. It was a standard tool for any high-level executive who needed to stay connected. She retrieved her noise-cancelling earbuds from her satchel, connected them to her tablet, and with a quiet click, joined the conference. Her face appeared on a screen thousands of miles away, a silent participant in a grid of other faces. "Isabella, can you hear us?" came the tinny voice of her lead counsel, Sir Richard Pembroke. She gave a subtle nod, not wanting to disturb the passengers around her. The conversation was highly technical, a flurry of legal jargon about share classes, holding companies, and regulatory approvals. Isabella simply listened, her expression neutral. She didn't need to speak. Her team was merely confirming that all conditions for the takeover were met. It was at that moment that Karen Miller was making her way down the aisle with the beverage cart. She saw the woman in 12C staring intently at a tablet, a small blinking light emanating from a device on her tray table. She saw the grid of faces on the screen. To Karen, this wasn't a business meeting. It was suspicious. It was a violation. Federal regulations prohibited voice calls on planes, and in her mind, a video conference was the same thing. She stopped the cart abruptly, her lips pursed into a thin line. "Ma'am," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin hum. "Ma'am, you need to turn that off. All voice and video calls are strictly prohibited." Isabella looked up, surprised by the aggressive tone. She calmly removed one earbud. "I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice even and polite. "This is a muted, receive-only conference. I'm not speaking. It's no different than watching a movie." "It is a live video call, and it is not allowed," Karen insisted, her voice rising slightly. She felt the eyes of other passengers turning towards them. She felt her authority being challenged by this woman in a sweatsuit who spoke with such calm defiance. "I need you to terminate the call immediately." Isabella recognized the futility of arguing. Causing a scene was the last thing she wanted. Her anonymity was her greatest asset. She gave a simple, compliant nod. "Of course." She tapped her screen, the grid of faces disappeared, and she placed the tablet back in her satchel. "My apologies," she said again, looking directly at Karen. But for Karen, the compliance felt like a rebuke. It was too easy, too calm. This woman wasn't apologetic. She was placating her. Humiliated and angry, Karen pushed the cart along, but the incident festered. She saw not a compliant passenger, but a subversive one who had been caught and had only backed down to avoid further trouble. She walked to the galley and picked up the in-flight phone. She buzzed the cockpit. First Officer Daniel Lowe answered. "Go for cockpit." "It's Karen," she said, her voice tight with indignation. "I'm having an issue with the passenger in 12C. She was on a prohibited video call, became argumentative when I confronted her, and is acting very suspiciously. I have a bad feeling about her." She embellished the story, turning Isabella's calm reply into an argument, and her quiet demeanor into suspicious behavior. It was a small lie, born of bruised pride, but it was about to have catastrophic consequences. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Thorne listened on his headset. The words argumentative, suspicious, and bad feeling were trigger words for him. They were the kind of vague, subjective terms that gave him the procedural cover he needed to act on his gut. And his gut, filtered through a lifetime of ingrained biases, told him everything he needed to know about a black woman in an exit row causing trouble. "What's her demeanor now?" Thorne asked, his voice a low growl. "She's being quiet," Karen reported, "but it's a defiant quiet. I don't feel comfortable with her on this flight, especially not in an exit row." That was all Thorne needed. The exit row, a position of trust, a security-sensitive seat. He saw a clear, textbook path to resolving this. He would remove the disruption. He would assert his authority. He would make the cabin safe, not from any real threat, but from a perceived challenge to the order he commanded. "Understood, Karen. Thank you for your vigilance," Thorne said, his tone grim and decisive. "Lock down the forward galley. I'm going to handle this personally." He disconnected the call and looked at his first officer. Daniel Lowe was younger, more progressive, and had a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Captain, are you sure? The paperwork for a diversion or a gate return is a nightmare." "We're not diverting," Thorne said, his jaw set. We're still over JFK airspace. We're going back to the gate. I will not have a non-compliant, potentially dangerous passenger on my aircraft. I'm the captain, and my primary duty is the safety of this flight. End of discussion." He keyed the intercom, his thumb pressing down on the button with a definitive click. His voice, calm and authoritative, boomed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor security issue on board. For the safety of all passengers and crew, we are required to return to the gate. We apologize for the delay and will provide more information once we are on the ground. Please remain in your seats." A collective groan went through the cabin. In seat 12C, Isabella Sterling felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew with absolute certainty that the minor security issue was her. The turn back to the gate was slow and ponderous, a lumbering beast reversing its course. The mood in the cabin shifted from the quiet monotony of travel to a tense, simmering unease. Passengers whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting around, searching for the source of the disruption. Isabella sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her expression a mark of calm. Inside, however, her mind was racing, processing the absurdity and the insult of the situation. She had built an empire on logic, data, and dispassionate analysis. This was the opposite. It was an action born of pure, unadulterated prejudice. As the plane finally docked with the jet bridge, the engines whining down, the seatbelt sign remained illuminated. A palpable tension filled the air. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Marcus Thorne emerged. He was an imposing figure in his crisp, decorated uniform. He didn't look at the cabin as a whole. His eyes, cold and focused, scanned the rows until they landed on 12C. He started down the aisle, his polished black shoes making firm, deliberate sounds on the carpet. He was flanked by Karen, who wore a look of vindicated self-importance. He stopped directly in front of Isabella's row. The passengers around her craned their necks, their phones already discreetly pointed in her direction. "Ma'am," Thorne said, his voice loud enough for the entire forward section to hear. "I'm Captain Thorne. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with me." Isabella looked up at him, her gaze steady. "May I ask why, Captain?" she asked, her voice low but clear, cutting through the whispers. "We have received a report that you have been non-compliant with crew instructions and are posing a potential security risk," he stated flatly, reciting a line he had likely used before. The man in the window seat, the one with the laptop, scoffed audibly. "A security risk? She's been sitting here reading a book," he muttered. Thorne shot him a withering glare. "Sir, this does not concern you." He turned his attention back to Isabella. "We don't need to have this discussion here. Please, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." "I believe we do need to have this discussion here," Isabella replied, her voice unwavering. "I was on a silent, muted video feed. Your flight attendant asked me to turn it off. I complied immediately and without argument. At what point was I non-compliant?" Her calm, logical questioning seemed to infuriate Thorne more than any outburst would have. He was used to dealing with hysterics or aggression, not this unshakable composure. It was as if she wasn't intimidated by his uniform, his title, or his authority. "Your compliance is not the issue," he snapped, his professional veneer cracking. "The issue is the judgment of my crew, and my judgment as the captain of this aircraft. I have deemed your presence a risk. Now, are you going to get up, or will I have to have you removed?" From the front of the plane, 2 Port Authority police officers appeared at the door, their presence signaling the finality of the captain's decision. The sight of their uniforms sent a fresh wave of shock through the cabin. Chloe, The younger flight attendant stood near the galley, her face pale. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. She had seen the entire interaction. The woman had been nothing but polite. She took a tentative step forward. "Captain," she began, with all due respect. She was completely— "Chloe, that's enough," Karen hissed, cutting her off with a sharp gesture. "Go to the rear galley. Now." Defeated, Chloe retreated, her eyes locking with Isabella's for a brief moment, a silent apology that Isabella acknowledged with a minuscule nod. This was it. There was no winning this battle. To resist would be to become the disruptive passenger they claimed she was. Her fight wasn't here, in the narrow confines of an airplane aisle. Her fight would be in the boardroom, on the stock market, in the places where real power was wielded. Slowly, deliberately, Isabella Sterling stood up. She reached under the seat, retrieved her leather satchel, and slung it over her shoulder. She didn't look at the shocked faces of her fellow passengers or the triumphant sneer on Karen's face. She didn't look at the vlogger who had his phone held high, live streaming the entire event. Her eyes were fixed on Captain Thorne. As she stepped out into the aisle, she paused, standing less than a foot from him. He was taller, but in that moment, she seemed to command the space between them. "Captain Thorne?" she said, her voice devoid of anger, yet carrying the weight of a coming storm. "You are making a mistake of catastrophic proportions. I promise you, you will remember my face." Thorne simply stared back, his expression a mask of arrogant certainty. "The only thing I'll remember is ensuring the safety of my flight. Now please, proceed off the aircraft." With a quiet dignity that seemed to suck the air out of the cabin, Isabella walked down the aisle, the two officers falling in step behind her. As she passed through the doorway and onto the jet bridge, the passengers erupted into a low roar of conversation. Some were angry about the delay, others were disgusted by the injustice they had just witnessed. The man in 12A, a corporate lawyer named David Chen, immediately began typing a furious email to Ascend Air's customer service, detailing the captain's gross abuse of authority. The vlogger, a young man named Leo, quickly added a title to his now viral live stream: "Racist pilot kicks innocent black woman off flight. Ascend Air." Back in the cockpit, Marcus Thorne felt a surge of satisfaction. He had faced a challenge, and he had won. He had maintained order. He had protected his ship. He settled back into his seat and keyed the intercom again. "Folks, we apologize for that. We'll be getting underway again shortly. Thank you for your patience." He truly believed it was over. He had no concept that he hadn't just removed a passenger. He had ejected the very woman who held the fate of all 180 souls on board and the 20,000 employees of Ascend Air in the palm of her hand. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. Back in the terminal, Isabella was escorted to a small, sterile security office just off the main concourse. The two Port Authority officers were professional, but firm. They asked for her identification. She handed over her driver's license. The name Isabella Sterling meant nothing to them. To them, she was simply the subject of a captain's removal order. One of the officers, a man with tired eyes named Officer Miller, explained the procedure. "The captain has the final say on his aircraft, ma'am. He's refused you passage. The airline will need to rebook you. You haven't been charged with anything. You're free to go." Isabella simply nodded. "Thank you, officer." She stepped out of the office and into the bustling terminal. The noise was jarring after the tense silence of the plane. She saw her former flight, 732, still attached to the gate, a metal tube full of people who had just witnessed her humiliation. For a single, fleeting moment, a wave of pure, hot anger washed over her. It was a primal rage against the injustice, the indignity, the sheer, unadulterated racism of it all. Then she took a deep breath. The anger receded, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. Marcus Thorne wanted to remember her face. She would ensure he would never be able to forget it. She walked to a quieter corner of the terminal, away from the crowds. She took out her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't call the airline's customer service line. She made one call to the one person who could execute her will with surgical precision. Julian Vance. He picked up on the first ring. "Isabella, I was just tracking your flight. Saw you turned back to the gate. Is everything all right?" Isabella's voice was unnervingly calm. "Julian, listen to me very carefully. The meeting is cancelled." There was a pause on the other end. "Cancelled? What happened? Is the board getting cold feet?" "No," Isabella said, her gaze fixed on the Ascend airplane. "The deal is off. Permanently." "What?" "Isabella, all the financing is in place. The documents are drawn. We can't just walk away." Julian protested, his voice laced with confusion. "We can and we are," she stated. Her next words were delivered with the chilling finality of a judge passing sentence. "And I want you to do two things for me, effective immediately. First, prepare a press release for 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The headline will be, 'Sterling Vanguard withdraws acquisition offer for Ascend Air, citing irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and leadership.' Second, and this is the most important part, Julian, at 9:31 a.m., I want you to begin liquidating our entire position in Ascend Air and its parent holding company. All of it. Don't be subtle. I want you to flood the market. Break the stocks back." Julian was stunned into silence. He had worked with Isabella for 15 years. He had seen her make ruthless decisions, but never one so swift, so absolute, and so personal. "Isabella, what in God's name happened on that plane?" "They showed me who they are, Julian," she said softly. "Now, I'm going to show them who I am." She disconnected the call. Meanwhile, back on Flight 732, the vlogger Leo's live stream had exploded. Thousands of people had watched the confrontation live. The clip was now being mirrored, retweeted, and shared across every social media platform. The hashtags "Wasn't flying while black" and "Boycott Ascend Air" were starting to trend. In the video, Isabella's calm, dignified voice could be heard clearly, as could Captain Thorne's aggressive, dismissive tone. In the rear galley, Chloe, the young flight attendant, was scrolling through the comments on her phone, her heart pounding. People were trying to identify the woman. One comment caught her eye. "That woman has such poise. She looks familiar. Is that Isabella Sterling?" Chloe's blood ran cold. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She quickly opened a web browser and typed it in. The first result was a Forbes article with the headline, "The Quiet Queen of Wall Street: How Isabella Sterling Built Her $10 billion Empire." The picture was unmistakable. It was the woman from 12C, dressed in a power suit, but with the same calm, intelligent eyes. Chloe frantically scrolled through the article. It mentioned her firm, Sterling Vanguard, and her reputation for turning around failing companies. Then she saw it. A link to a recent financial news piece speculating on a mysterious, aggressive investor buying up Ascend Air's debt. The article hypothesized that this anonymous entity was positioning itself for a complete takeover. Chloe felt like she was going to be sick. She grabbed the interplane phone and buzzed the cockpit, her hand trembling. First Officer Daniel Lowe answered, his voice annoyed. "What is it, Chloe? We're about to get clearance to push back again." "You need to see this. You need to see this right now," Chloe stammered. "The passenger we removed. You need to Google her name. It's Isabella Sterling." "I don't have time for—" Thorne started to bark into the phone. But Lowe held up a hand, his curiosity piqued by the panic in Chloe's voice. He pulled out his own tablet and typed the name. His face went white. He stared at the screen, his mouth agape as he connected the dots. The Forbes article, the investment news, the anonymous shareholder. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening crash. He looked at his captain. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Oh my God, Marcus, do you know who she is?" Thorne scoffed. "I know she was a problem, that's all that matters." "No," Lowe said, shoving the tablet in front of his captain's face. "She's not a problem, Marcus. She's the problem. She's Isabella Sterling, founder of Sterling Vanguard. They're the shadow investor. Everyone's been talking about it for months. We just kicked our new owner off the goddamn plane." The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. The arrogant certainty, the self-righteous satisfaction, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching terror. He stared at the picture of the woman he had just publicly humiliated. He heard her final words echo in his mind. "You will remember my face." He grabbed the phone. "Get her back," he croaked, his voice cracking. "Go to the gate agent, find her, get her back on this plane. Now." But it was too late. Isabella Sterling was already gone, melting back into the city, leaving behind a ticking time bomb set to detonate at 9:31 a.m. In the San Francisco headquarters of Ascend Air, the mood was electric. CEO Richard Davies was pacing his expansive corner office, a glass of champagne already in his hand. The entire board was assembled in the adjacent conference room, munching on pastries and exchanging self-congratulatory remarks. They were minutes away from the meeting that would save their company. The mysterious investor, the one who had bought up their debt and held their fate in its hands, was finally revealing themselves. Their sources indicated the investor was benevolent, seeking not to dismantle the company, but to rebuild it. It was a miracle. "She should be landing any minute," Davies said to his CFO, a nervous man named George. "This is it, George. This is the day we turn it all around. No more layoffs, no more bankruptcy scares. A new beginning." His assistant, a young woman named Sarah, poked her head in. "Mr. Davies, your phone has been buzzing non-stop, and the corporate communications line is blowing up." Davies waved a dismissive hand. "Hold all calls, Sarah. Nothing is more important than this meeting." But Sarah persisted, her face pale. "Sir, I think you need to see this. It's all over the internet." She handed him her tablet, the screen displaying the viral video from Leo the vlogger. Davies watched, his smile slowly dissolving into a look of horror. He saw the familiar interior of an Ascend airplane. He saw his own employee, Karen Miller, and his senior captain, Marcus Thorne, and he saw them removing a black woman from the flight. He didn't recognize her, but the optics were a catastrophe. "Get our PR team on this immediately," he roared. "I want a statement drafted. Apologize, offer a full refund, whatever it takes. Find that passenger and send her 1,000 apologies and a lifetime of free flights." But as he was shouting, his CFO, George, was staring at his own phone, his face ashen. He wasn't looking at social media. He was looking at the stock ticker. It was 9:31 a.m. in New York. "Richard," George whispered, his voice trembling. "Oh, dear God, Richard." He held up his phone. The chart for Ascend Air's parent company, AAH Holdings, was a vertical red line pointing straight down. Their stock, which had been trading at a fragile $12 a share, had just collapsed. 10. 85 bars. It was in free fall. A red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Trading halted. Pending news. "What is this? What's happening?" Davies stammered, grabbing the phone. At that exact moment, every phone and computer in the boardroom began to ping with a news alert from the Associated Press. For immediate release, Sterling Vanguard. Withdraws acquisition offer for Ascend Air, citing irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and leadership. The room fell into a stunned, deathly silence. Sterling Vanguard, the quiet queen of Wall Street, Isabella Sterling, their anonymous savior. Davies stared at the press release, then back at the video on the tablet. His mind, reeling from the whiplash, slowly, agonizingly put the pieces together. The minor security issue. The woman in the video, the name of the firm. "Get me the passenger manifest for Flight 732, he screamed at his assistant. It took less than a minute. Sarah ran back in, holding a printout, her finger shaking as she pointed to a name. Sterling Isabella, seat 12B. The champagne glass slipped from Richard Davies's numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The chaos on the ground was mirrored by the chaos on Flight 732, which was still sitting at the gate at JFK. Captain Thorne had been informed by a frantic gate agent that Isabella Sterling had left the airport. The passengers, who had been simmering with impatience, were now openly mutinous, their phones buzzing with the same news alerts that were rocking the financial world. They knew exactly what had happened. They knew they were sitting in a metal tube owned by a company that had just committed corporate suicide. Thorne sat in the cockpit, paralyzed by the enormity of his mistake. He had been a pilot for 35 years. He had weathered engine failures, bomb threats, and emergency landings, but he had never felt fear like this. It was the fear of a man who had not just made a professional error, but had revealed a fatal flaw in his character to the entire world, and in doing so had brought down an entire kingdom. First Officer Lowe sat beside him, silent, unable to even look at his captain. He knew their careers were over. The call came from the Chief of Flight Operations. It was brief and brutal. "Marcus, what did you do?" The voice on the other end said, cold with fury. "The board is in meltdown. The stock is worthless. Flight 732 is cancelled. The entire fleet is being grounded, pending an emergency board meeting. Your flight credentials are suspended, effective immediately, both of you. A team is coming to escort you from the premises. Do not speak to anyone." The line went dead. Grounded. Suspended. Escorted. The words hammered into Thorne's consciousness. He looked out the cockpit window at the other Ascend airplanes, at the ground crew, at the baggage handlers. He had always seen them as parts of his machine, his world. Now, he realized, he had likely just put them all out of a job. His arrogant power play, his little moment of asserting authority over a woman he had judged on sight, had not cost the company a few $1,000s in a lawsuit. It had vaporized over $2 billion of shareholder value in less than 5 minutes. It was, perhaps, the single most expensive act of racial profiling in corporate history, and the market's brutal verdict was only the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in corporate implosion. The story was no longer just a viral video. It was a lead story on every major news network. The narrative was irresistible. A self-made black billionaire, a symbol of underestimated power, brought low by the casual prejudice of a pilot, only to turn the tables with the cold, swift justice of the free market. Isabella Sterling remained silent. She issued no further statements. She didn't need to. The market was doing her talking for her. For Ascend Air, it was a death spiral. With their stock worthless and their largest creditor now actively hostile, their financing evaporated overnight. Other creditors called in their loans, and the company was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within a week. The grounding of the fleet became permanent. 20,000 employees, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents, baggage handlers, were suddenly facing unemployment. The public reckoning for the individuals involved was just as swift and merciless. Captain Marcus Thorne and flight attendant Karen Miller were fired immediately, their terminations announced in a desperate public statement from the crumbling airline. But that was only the start. The FAA launched a full investigation into Thorne's conduct, not just for the removal of Isabella, but for falsifying the initial security report. His pilot's license, the very symbol of his identity, was revoked permanently. He was disgraced, a pariah in an industry built on trust and judgment. The pilots' union, facing immense public pressure, refused to support him. He tried to get a job as a private charter pilot, but his name was now toxic. No one would hire the man who sank an airline. He lost everything. His pension, tied to company stock, was now worthless. He had to sell his sprawling suburban home. His wife, humiliated by the scandal, left him. He was last seen by a former colleague working as a dispatcher for a small, regional trucking company, a ghost in a dimly lit office, his authoritative captain's voice now reduced to routing trucks through the night. He was a man who once commanded the skies, now grounded in every sense of the word. Karen Miller's fate was similarly grim. Her embellished story, her role as the instigator, came out during the internal investigation, with Chloe's testimony serving as the nail in her coffin. She too was blacklisted from the industry. Every airline she applied to saw the blemish on her record and turned her away. She had prided herself on her 30 years of service, but she was now defined by a single, malicious act. She ended up working retail, stocking shelves at a big box store, her crisp uniform replaced with a polyester vest, her days filled with the endless task of folding clothes, haunted by the polite, unshakable face of the woman she had wronged. Richard Davies, the CEO, was forced to resign in disgrace. He was seen as the captain of a ship that he had allowed to be run aground by the bigotry of his own crew. He faced shareholder lawsuits that would tie him up in legal battles for years, wiping out most of his personal fortune. His dream of a new beginning had become a nightmare of his own making. But karma's calculus is not just about punishment. It is also about balance. Chloe, the young flight attendant who had tried to speak up, became an unlikely hero in the story. She was interviewed by journalists and praised for her integrity. When the bankruptcy proceedings began, her name was passed to rival airlines as a model employee. She received multiple job offers, eventually accepting a position at a major international carrier that came with a promotion and a significant pay raise. She was even asked to help develop their new diversity and inclusion training programs. Her small act of courage had been rewarded. David Chen, the lawyer in 12A, became a key witness in the class action lawsuit filed by employees and shareholders against the old Ascend Air management. Leo, the vlogger, saw his subscriber count skyrocket into the millions, launching his career as a prominent citizen journalist and commentator. And Isabella Sterling. She watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of her Manhattan penthouse. She took no pleasure in the destruction she had wrought. To her, it wasn't revenge. It was a consequence. It was a market correction, not for a stock, but for a culture. She had exposed a rot within the company, and the company had failed the stress test. For weeks, the wreckage of Ascend Air sat in legal limbo. Its assets, planes, routes, gates were to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Analysts predicted the company would be carved up and sold for parts. Then, 2 months after the fateful flight, a new bidder emerged. A newly formed corporation, backed by an anonymous source of funding, made an offer to buy the entirety of Ascend Air's remaining assets out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. When the paperwork was filed, the source was revealed. The new owner was a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Vanguard. The news that Ascend Air was officially bankrupt sent a predictable wave of excitement through Wall Street. The carrion birds began to circle. Vulture funds and corporate liquidators saw a prime opportunity to pick at the carcass of a once proud airline. The bankruptcy auction was seen as a formality, a process by which Ascend's valuable assets, its coveted gate slots at major hubs, its international route licenses, its serviceable aircraft, would be carved up and sold off to the highest bidders, its constituent parts absorbed into larger, healthier competitors. The brand itself was considered toxic, the name Ascend Air, a synonym for corporate failure and public disgrace. The story, it seemed, was over. Then, on the final day of bidding, an offer was submitted that stunned the financial world into silence. It wasn't from a rival airline or a liquidation firm. It was a single, all-encompassing bid from a newly formed holding company, an entity that wanted not just the parts, but the entire broken machine. The offer was to purchase all remaining assets, assume a structured portion of the debt, and take the company whole out of bankruptcy. The price was insultingly low, yet strategically positioned to be just high enough to be the most attractive option for the creditors and the bankruptcy court. The name of the holding company was Phoenix Aviation Group, but it took less than an hour for investigative journalists to trace its funding back to its sole, silent source: Sterling Vanguard. Isabella Sterling wasn't just buying back the airline, she was executing the most hostile and yet elegant takeover in modern aviation history. She had triggered the company's collapse, waited for its value to crater to near zero, and was now claiming the entire kingdom for the price of a few scattered castles. The move was breathtaking in its audacity. It wasn't driven by vengeance, analysts concluded, but by something far more formidable: value. She had seen the intrinsic worth beneath the rot and had engineered a scenario where she was the only person in a position to claim it. Her first act was not to issue a press release or hold a conference for investors. It was to send a simple, direct email to the personal accounts of all 20,000 former employees of Ascend Air. The subject line read, "An invitation from Phoenix Aviation Group." The email summoned them not to a sterile conference call or a webinar, but to a physical meeting. The location, the airline's largest maintenance hangar at JFK, a cavernous building that had sat dark and silent for 2 months. For the thousands of furloughed workers, the email was met with a mix of deep skepticism and a desperate, flickering hope. Many, like Frank Kowalski, a 30-year veteran mechanic, assumed it was a final, cruel formality. "They're probably just going to tell us our severance is cancelled and sell our toolboxes for scrap," he grumbled to his wife, though he still ironed his old work shirt and decided to go. He had to see it end with his own eyes. Chloe Davis, who had been fielding lucrative offers from other airlines, felt a different pull. She felt a sense of unfinished business, a strange loyalty not to the old company, but to the woman who had inadvertently launched her career. She booked a flight to New York. She had to be there. On the appointed day, the hangar was filled with a nervous, murmuring crowd. The air was thick with the scent of stale jet fuel and anxiety. Thousands of former employees stood amongst the silent, ghost-white fuselages of grounded planes, their faces etched with uncertainty. They were a cross-section of a broken company: pilots in worn leather jackets, flight attendants in civilian clothes, engineers and ground crew with grease still ingrained in the lines of their hands. At precisely 10 a.m., a single spotlight illuminated a makeshift stage. Isabella Sterling walked to the podium. She wore a simple dark blue dress, no power suit, no armor. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping across the hangar, acknowledging their presence, their pain. The murmuring died, replaced by an absolute, expectant silence. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and steady, yet carrying to every corner of the vast space. "My name is Isabella Sterling. For most of you, I am not a welcome sight. I am the woman who was kicked off Flight 732. I am the investor whose actions led to the bankruptcy that cost you your jobs, your security, and your peace of mind. I will not stand here and pretend otherwise. What happened to this company, and to you, started with me. And I know that for many of you, your anger is justified." She let that statement hang in the air, a raw admission of her role. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was acknowledging a truth. "But I am also here to tell you that the airline you worked for was sick," she continued, her tone shifting from empathetic to analytical. It was suffering from a disease of indifference, a culture where seniority was mistaken for wisdom and procedure was used as a weapon. It was a place where customer complaints were treated as annoyances to be dismissed, not as opportunities to improve. It was a company where a uniform became a crown for some, not a mantle of responsibility for all. The incident on Flight 732 was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much deeper illness. It was the crack that proved the entire foundation was rotten. She saw heads nodding in the crowd. She was speaking to their own frustrations, to the 1,000 tiny indignities they had witnessed or endured over the years. "I didn't bring this company down to destroy it," she said, her voice rising with passion. "I did it because it needed to be broken apart so it could be rebuilt. Rebuilt on a foundation of respect. Rebuilt on the principle that every single person, from the passenger in the last row to the mechanic on the graveyard shift to the CEO, deserves to be treated with dignity. I am not in the business of tearing things down. I am in the business of building things that last. That is why I bought what was left of Ascend Air, not for its planes or its gates, but for its potential, and that potential is you. It's the good people in this hangar who showed up to work every day and did their jobs with pride and professionalism, despite the failing culture around you. I believe in the Chloes of this airline, the Franks, the thousands of you who are the heart and soul of this operation." She leaned forward. "Today, we start over. The name Ascend Air and the poison associated with it is officially retired. We are a new airline. Our name is Sterling Ascend, and we have a new pledge. 1. Every voice matters. 2. Service is an honor, not a chore. 3. Safety is more than a checklist. It's our character. 4. Dignity is non-negotiable. Starting today, we are offering to rehire every one of you at your previous seniority and pay grade, with back pay for the last month. Your acceptance is contingent on one thing: your commitment to this new pledge and your participation in a new, comprehensive training program designed to make us the undisputed leader in service and safety culture." A wave of stunned murmurs swept the hangar. Back pay. Their old jobs back. It was more than anyone had dared to hope for. "We will be investing $1 billion in a new fleet of aircraft, retiring the old, inefficient planes. We are establishing a new, independent ethics committee with representatives from every employee group to ensure that an abuse of authority like the one I experienced can never happen again. We are building a new leadership team, with promotions coming from within for those who have demonstrated integrity." She then smiled for the first time. "And I'm pleased to announce our new Vice President of In-Flight Experience and Training will be Ms. Chloe Davis." A gasp went through the crowd as a spotlight found a shocked Chloe, whose hands flew to her mouth. A spontaneous, warm applause erupted around her. "This is our new beginning," Isabella concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. "I am not asking you to work for me. I am asking you to build with me. Let's show the world what it looks like when a company is built not just for profit, but on principle. Let's show them how we ascend." For a moment, there was silence. Then one person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the hangar was filled with a thunderous, emotional ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It was the sound of 20,000 lives being given a second chance, the sound of hope roaring back to life. 6 months later, the first Sterling Ascend flight, SA-101, sat gleaming on the tarmac at JFK, its livery a brilliant silver and deep blue. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The flight crew, resplendent in their new, modern uniforms, moved with a renewed sense of pride. Isabella Sterling was on board, sitting in seat 12C, the very seat from which she had been removed. Chloe, in her new executive role, was there to see the flight off, giving a final, confident nod to the cabin crew. The flight to San Francisco was a portrait of the new culture. It was flawless. Not because nothing went wrong, but because when a passenger had a small issue with their entertainment screen, the crew addressed it with swift, genuine empathy. It was a small moment, but it was everything. Thousands of miles away, in a greasy spoon diner off an interstate in Ohio, the late-night news played on a small, buzzing television mounted in the corner. Marcus Thorne, now 50 pounds heavier, and with the permanent fatigue of a man working the midnight shift, sat hunched over a cup of bitter coffee. He was on a break from his job routing trucks for a third-rate logistics company. The news report was a glowing feature on the remarkable turnaround of the year. Sterling Ascend's successful relaunch. He watched the gleaming new plane take off. He saw the proud faces of the crew he once commanded. He saw a brief interview with the new CEO, Isabella Sterling, her face the picture of calm, indomitable success. The reporter called her a visionary. Thorne stared at the screen, the coffee turning to acid in his stomach. He didn't feel anger anymore. That had burned out long ago, leaving behind only a hollow, aching emptiness. He finally understood. He hadn't just removed a passenger that day. He had ejected himself from his own life. He had been the captain of a world he had created, and with one single, arrogant, prejudiced act, he had grounded himself forever, left to watch from the dirt as she and the world he had lost soared into the heavens without him. This story serves as a powerful, real-world reminder that prejudice and arrogance carry a price, and sometimes that price is catastrophic. Captain Thorne and his airline learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. The person you underestimate could be the very foundation upon which your world is built. Isabella Sterling's story is one of quiet strength, showing that the most powerful response to injustice isn't always a loud protest, but a strategic, decisive action that reshapes the entire board. It's a testament to the idea that true power lies not in a uniform or a title, but in integrity, vision, and the courage to act on your principles. If this story of karmic justice resonated with you, and if you believe that character is more important than position, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button to let us know you're with us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories where karma delivers the final, unforgettable verdict. Thank you for listening.